Radio in battlefield situations where armor and vehicles were the core element proved to be essential for establishing what is now called command and control. Tanks left to fight on their own, or artillery with no central direction, were at a permanent tactical disadvantage. Nevertheless, it took time before German practice was replicated in other armored forces. British Army field regulations, issued as late as 1935, carried no mention of radio. Radios were rapidly developed in the first year of war, but in 1940, runners and telephone remained the principal means for front-line communication. Tanks eventually received the standard WS-19 AM radio, which allowed two-way communication between tanks and with the higher command posts, despite the difficulties using AM in a moving vehicle. Soviet and Japanese tanks generally had no radios except for the tank commander of frontline units, and those that did exist were of poor quality and performance or in short supply. In Japanese armored operations, instructions were commonly given by hand signal, flares, or an elaborate system of colored and patterned flags. Soviet defeat in 1941 owed a good deal to the lack of radio at all levels. The situation improved over time with the generous supply of 245,000 field radios from the United States and Britain. Radios down to small unit level were fitted in the commander's tank, but command and control of tank forces by radio never matched German practice. The United States Army in the 1930s, like the British, assumed that telephone lines and conventional messaging would be adequate means for communication, as they had been for the American Wartime Expeditionary Force in 1918. But under pressure from the newly created Mechanized Corps, soon to be the Armored Force, the Army's Signal Corps laboratory began to develop high quality FM radio sets for use in tanks and vehicles, using quartz crystals to create stable frequencies, good reception, and immunity from jamming and interference. Major Army exercises in Louisiana in the summer of 1940 showed that FM radio functioned well to create an effective web for controlling battlefield armor. The SCR-508 became the standard tank radio for two-way communication between tanks and with tactical command posts, and proved its worth in the major armored operations in Europe in 1944. The only problem proved to be the vulnerability of FM quartz crystals to sudden failure due to a phenomenon known as aging. The American physicist Virgil Bottom recruited to the quartz crystal section of the Signal Corp laboratory, discovered the cause and the cure in time for the fighting in Normandy. By 1944, United States forces had not only the largest number of radios per unit of any of the warring powers, but radios of high reliability and performance. For infantry units, particularly for those detailed to support advancing tanks, communication was more problematic. Early radios were heavy, cumbersome, and difficult to operate on the move. But because most operations were mobile, it was necessary to find a means to allow troops on the ground to communicate with armor and artillery and to establish voice control over forward infantry units to ensure more effective tactical deployment. The idea that an integrated web could be constructed linking command with small units and small units with each other proved difficult in practice, chiefly because armor, artillery, and infantry used different radios tuned to different frequencies. A common frequency was introduced for British forces only in 1945. Common infantry armor radio arrived in American units only in the final months of 1944. For American operations in which infantry and tanks were supposed to work forward together, the problem was a real one. The typical infantry radios, the SCR 586 AM handie-talkie, primitive ancestor of the mobile phone, and the larger SCR-300 AM walkie-talkie, operated by two men, were both incompatible with the tank's SCR-508 FM set. To summon assistance or to provide intelligence, infantry had to route messages through tactical command centers, a procedure that was too slow to allow the immediate response needed. Improvisations were used to try to circumvent the problem. Infantry radios were sometimes placed inside the tanks, where their performance was limited by noise and movement. The most common solution was the use of a field telephone welded to the rear of the tank and linked to the tank's intercom system. An infantryman could talk directly to the crew with instructions about targets and risks, though he remained dangerously exposed to enemy sniper fire.